Welcome to this month's Community Wise podcast. I am Holly Long, your host, and we have an exciting day today. It is about regional housing partnership. It's a huge thing here at LISC, and we are bringing in our partners, Mid-America Regional Council, and some of our other partners who are co-chairing the committee. And so just welcome to our conversation. It's real informal, as I always say. Just having a conversation about housing and why it is on everybody's mind in this region. So if we're going to kick it off, I'll start here. Andrea, if you don't mind introducing yourself and telling us what you do and kind of how you even got here. And yeah.
Of course.
Welcome.
I'm Andrea Generaux, and I'm program officer at LISC, and I am working on the Regional Housing Partnership with Katie, who will introduce herself here in a minute. And I've only been at LISC for a year, but have been working on housing in and around the Kansas City, Kansas area for a long time now, doing community organizing with neighborhoods and working on countywide housing issues in Wyandotte County. So I was excited to sort of take that knowledge and that information that I've gained and bring it to a regional level. So,
all right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Katie Killen. I'm the Housing Program Manager here at Mid-America Regional Council. I've been here for almost 2 years. It'll be in November, and getting to work alongside Andrea on the Regional Housing Partnership. Some about my background. I worked in local government for a while and then went back actually and got my law degree and did a focus in urban land use environmental law. And after that, practiced with Legal Aid of Western Missouri with neighborhoods in Eastside Kansas City around housing issues. And then also worked as a tenants' rights attorney for a while as well. So housing and community development and local government are all things from my background that I get to bring to my work with the Regional Housing Partnership.
Dope. Commissioner?
Yes, thank you. I'm Janeé Hanslick, and I currently serve as the county commissioner in Johnson County for District 4, just reelected to my second term.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I think sometimes. But my career has actually been as a social worker.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, my first job as a social worker was at a homeless shelter right outside of Washington, D.C. And then when I moved to Kansas, my work has been in domestic violence, and I most recently was the director of Safe Home, which is Johnson County's domestic violence agency. So I've seen the importance of housing throughout my career. And the thing that I am most excited about being part of this regional housing partnership is that it really has not been that long where this discussion of housing has come to the forefront. For example, when I was first elected 5 years ago, housing at the county level was looked at as, well, that's something we have to provide for vulnerable people or low-income people.
Right.
And I've seen such a change because now people are realizing, oh, housing is part of economic development.
Absolutely.
It's not just something we have to worry about for low-income people. We've got people who are unable to find housing who have middle income, and so I'm excited that we are taking this opportunity to kind of ride the wave of that interest and hopefully set some foundations for the future of better housing opportunities in the metro area.
Yeah. Okay. Next.
Awesome.
Madam Mayor Pro-Tem.
Thank you. I am Rayana Park-Shaw. I am 5th District Councilwoman and Mayor Pro-Tem of Kansas City.
The first Black woman Mayor Pro-Tem. Thank you.
First Black appointed.
Oh, there we go.
So I am actually serving my second term. We just were sworn in August 1st. And so sworn in as the Mayor Pro-Tem, and I'm really honored to be here. Professionally, my background is in healthcare. I've got over almost 30 years of healthcare experience. But in my capacity as a council person, I've served on the subcommittee for housing policy for the city and also led the mayor's task force on houselessness, where I unfortunately had an opportunity to see the great need that many of our residents, our constituents have as the housing issues continue to be pervasive in not just in Kansas City, but in this region. And I'm really excited now as the chair of the neighborhood development committee, which will also address and deal with housing issues for the city. I'm excited to be here to represent Kansas City in this regional partnership, because I do think that, as Commissioner Hanslick just mentioned, that the discussion of housing, I think, is somewhat new. I think from this perspective, but I don't know that I'm aware of anyone in this region really coming together in the way that we have in this regional housing partnership to really look at housing from the regional perspective.
Absolutely.
And it's an issue that is pervasive across our country. And so I'm really glad to be a part of this collaboration and excited to be here today. Thank you.
All right.
If I could just follow up on something that Rayana said, I think is really important, is the issue of healthcare, because I think that's another area where we are beginning to understand that place matters in terms of someone's physical and mental health.
Absolutely.
And so I'm so glad to have her having her healthcare background as part of this discussion, because that's really important. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah, people often forget about the social determinants of health.
Yes.
And how housing is part of that. And if you don't have adequate housing, or let's even go back, if you have housing and it's not the best housing situation, typically you might end up with allergies and asthma, and you don't know to change air filters and all this kind of stuff. And then we take it to a step further. If you don't have housing, period, like you're exposed, like, so
right.
all that to say, how did we get here? How did we come up with this regional housing partnership? And most importantly, how are we going to tackle this huge issue that is going to span decades from here until my kids are probably in their 20s and they're only 8 and 3? I'll kick it off to whoever wants to start.
So how the Regional Housing Partnership kind of came together with Mid-America Regional Council and LISC, and then bringing folks along. Mark has several different committees. In fact, one of the jokes is meetings are really cool is what Mark really stands for. But we have a First Suburbs Coalition, and they looked at workforce housing specifically in 2019. They were able to partner with NLC to do a summit and a study. And coming out of that, one of the takeaways was there was lots of conversation getting started around housing, but there wasn't anybody really kind of weaving folks together to be able to talk about at a regional scope. And so coming out of that, there were discussions with LISC Greater Kansas City and all of the great background that you all bring in the housing and development arena, and this partnership was sort of forged out of that. We didn't get funding until end of 2021 when I was able to come along, and then Andrea was able to come and join us as well to get this work underway. So,
and speaking of funding, how is that going? Who are our funders? How is this even possible? How was that conversation? Because I get to do fundraising as well.
Right.
And so I know that sometimes funders have their own preconceived notions. We love you, funders, don't get me twisted. However, we all know everyone has their own agendas. How did you all, as a coalition or as a crew, bring funders into what we're doing, and why and how? Anybody?
So we have a framework that came out of some of those early discussions. Like I was saying, with the Workforce Housing Summit, there was also some intensive developer and affordable housing kind of system folks that were brought together to just kind of see what were the big needs and what would an effective housing system look like in Kansas City. And so it really came together through this framework of 7 elements of an effective housing system that we're currently working on different projects under. I like to also try to just summarize those as they're the tools, the networks, and the assets that we're trying to build in the community. But this framework of 7 is really how we sort of pitched it to our foundations. And those foundations who have been graciously supporting us are the Block Family Foundation, the Hall Family Foundation, the Health Forward Foundation, and the Sunderland Foundation. And then last year, you might want to talk a little bit more about this, Andrea. There was an earmark that Congressman Cleaver was able to get us through HUD that will be part of our funding stream as well. So.
Personal plug. Shout out to Rev. He is Jeff and I's former boss. This is why Jeff and I fell in love with housing is because of him. And this little picture that he keeps in his office of where he grew up. It's a little shack. And he was born on his grandmother's kitchen table. And so, you know, when you are under someone's auspice like that and understanding what public housing can do for anybody, and it takes the stigma away from like, oh, you grew up in public? Yeah, and he's a member of Congress. So anyway, go ahead, talk about the...
No, I mean, I think that that's just a perfect example of talking about the funders and everyone who's kind of come to the table and sort of to your point that, you know, there's this momentum right now. There's this, all of the communities are feeling the issues and constraints of housing in different ways and at different levels. And I'm excited at the opportunity to kind of, in this last couple of years, we've been able to kind of look at I've been talking about it as like a hot air balloon view or a sky view of kind of seeing who is doing what in the region and how do we start to weave them together? How do we connect them? How do we figure out where those opportunities are and take advantage of that momentum and that interest that funders in the community, elected officials, and community members have, and find a way that we can come together and move forward in housing so that we are thinking about housing, not just our current need and our current sort of, you know, crisis that I feel like some people are in around housing, but also what does that look like 15 years from now and 10 years from now? And how do we not have these same conversations 10 years from now? How do we make sure that we're creating those changes that need to happen and really thinking long-term for people in our communities?
And if I might, to your point, Andrea, about braiding together these different elements that are occurring around the region, the timing was perfect in terms of Johnson County's involvement because about 3 years ago, the United Community Services of Johnson County undertook a community housing survey of Johnson County, and that was actually funded partly through the county, partly through some city governments too. And as a result of that survey, the county commission became more interested in what could we do. We can't solve the whole problem, but what could we be doing better? And that's when myself and 2 other commissioners formed a housing subcommittee. And it was about that same time that Mark started talking about the regional housing partnership. And I said, oh, yes, I've got to get involved in this. And again, when you think about it, it's not been that long. And so sometimes I think we have to remind ourselves because we want to solve this situation tomorrow. And so you had asked, how do we do that? And it's you know, one thing at a time and not rushing into something and then finding out, no, that's not the right way, but being thoughtful and planning around it. But the timing, I think, is perfect for bringing a lot of these different pieces together.
I agree with that. I'll just add also from Kansas City's perspective in that we established the Housing Trust Fund, which actually happened in the term, actually now, who was Councilman Lucas at the time, but now our mayor, Quentin Lucas, initiated the concept of the Housing Trust Fund. And in this particular term, I'm glad to say that our council and the voters of Kansas City supported that housing trust fund, where we now have $75 million for housing. And so we are moving methodically through those funds to really try to create housing for Kansas City. But I do agree with you. I think it's a great opportunity, a great time for us to work collaboratively. I truly believe we are stronger, better together. And so I'm excited about the work that we're doing to really address this from a regional perspective.
And one of the things that Katie, one of the challenges I think that we face in this work is that, when you're talking about the region, which is 9 counties and 119 cities, we have to think of it constantly as a continuum. And I am also a social worker. So I often think about it in terms of meeting communities where they are, because we understand that there are some communities like Johnson County and like Kansas City, Missouri, that are further along in this work and in this understanding of the work. But then there's other communities that are just maybe don't have the capacity or just not at that place yet. And so making sure that we're being intentional about how we move the work forward so that we're bringing people along with us and we're not dragging communities or forcing communities, but at the same time keeping that momentum and that work that that's been done, and making sure that we're again, weaving those together. I love that term, we're weaving them together, but like making sure we're weaving that work together so that we can learn from each other as communities move forward and learn more, and we can take those opportunities where maybe things didn't work out where we thought, or we found that thing that did, and how do we weave that into the process so that we can be, again, intentional in the work that we're doing and take that time to make sure that they're being thoughtful about it.
Sure. I think something you said too, Andrea, is important, that housing needs are on a continuum, and every community is a little bit different. And we part of our challenge is to define what we're going to be looking at, because on one end of the spectrum you have people who are in situations where they are chronically homeless, and then you have all the way on the other end where people are cost burden homeowners, and everything in between. So where are the opportunities for us to make the biggest impact? Because that's huge to take on that whole spectrum.
Yeah. And I was going to ask, in Johnson County, city girl, you don't think of Johnson County as having a housing issue. Do you mind explaining to us and kind of breaking down, like, I know you have one of the richest zip codes in the country, but then there's other parts that, but for the work that, I've learned from LISC and from Mark, had no idea.
Oh, yes. And I think that's, that was actually one of the reasons I ran for office as a social worker, is because I was frustrated by the lack of attention to vulnerable people in Johnson County, and seeing the needs to invest in housing or transit and other types of services. And I feel like in this role, it's given me the opportunity to speak out and to bring awareness to those issues. And yes, housing, it's interesting. I just had a conversation with a gentleman the other day. He was concerned about the Habitat for Humanity project that's being considered for Olathe. And he said, I said something to the effect of, well, this is housing that will be affordable for people like teachers and police officers and firefighters. And he said, well, those people can already afford a house. They don't need this kind of help. And I said, oh my, let me tell you that.
Shout out to all the public service workers out there.
Shout out to all of them.
Yes. Well, in fact, I was recently at a National Association of Counties conference, and another community. And let me say, everyone across the country is dealing with this housing. We're not, it's not just the Kansas City metro. It is across the country. And it's it's exciting to see what other communities are doing. And but one of the programs that one place had started, they call it hero housing, and it's housing that's affordable for teachers and firefighters and law enforcement. And I thought that was a really cool way of looking at it. It lifts up those folks to say, these are folks that just want to have a place to live in the community where they work. But yes, in Johnson County, really not different than anywhere else, but wages have not kept up with the cost of housing. And in Johnson County, there just isn't enough housing. That's the major problem. There is not, the supply of housing is not meeting the demand. So the prices, the appraised values are going up. And that combined with developers really can't afford to build middle income kind of housing. It's either, what they have told me is it's either big apartment buildings or very expensive homes. And so like Kansas City, we're looking at potentially a housing trust fund. We've actually been, the county has, for the first time ever, put money into gap financing for some of the places that have low-income housing tax credits. But it's it is hard to overcome that sort of siloed view that I afforded a house. Why can't they afford a house? Well, you bought your house 30 years ago.
And what about your property taxes, friends? And what about your utility costs? Because people don't often talk about how much people are paying in utilities. And
Exactly.
that's a whole nother thing.
Well, and that's part of why transit is such an important part of this. If you don't have to buy a car, you can put more money into a house, into housing, or whatever that might look like for you.
And that's what I think is great about being able to take that larger view of what people are doing. United Community Services, UCS, did such a wonderful job. I was lucky enough to assist with some of the facilitated conversations and just to hear from the community, just to hear, because they did a wonderful job of hearing from the community and listening to seniors who would like to move out of their homes because they can't maintain them, but that there's nowhere affordable that they can go within Johnson County. And also listening to those people who maybe have a disability. There was someone who, had a condition that had her on disability, and she was like, finding housing in Johnson County is almost impossible, and the process was really difficult. And so I think those stories that aren't often heard within the community, so when there is a thought of like, oh, well, they should be able to afford housing, like just being able to hear some of those stories and being able to lift that work up that people have done, I think is exciting and great for us to see and to be able to start with that education process of housing. Because although we've been having conversations about housing for a while now in many communities, a lot of it has been at more citywide levels or like at funder levels or other places, and we haven't really been having those on the ground conversations with community members. I think they've been feeling the housing issues, but not necessarily been a part of those conversations. So I'm excited as we move forward to find those opportunities to engage community and stakeholders into the conversation more.
So what have we accomplished so far in this partnership? I know it's only been, a year and some change, and you've been here for a year. You've been here for 2, or at Mark for 2. So
I'd say about 18 months.
18 months.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good round number. So, just getting folks together. Our strategy committee kicked off at the end of the year last year. We had our first strategy committee meeting with these wonderful co-chairs here.
And so tell us about their role as the co-chairs and who makes the strategy committee. And, strategy is such a buzzword. You mind breaking it down for just the people who just like, Katie, what does that mean?
Sure. So this first year, the strategy committee has really helped us kind of dive into this baseline. That's how Andrea and I keep trying to kind of describe what we've been doing. We've been trying to do some baseline research and also launch a few tools and get some assets started. So this year, the strategy committee, like I said, we have our two co-chairs here with us, but it's made up of folks from many different sectors, the different parts of the housing sector. There are so many pieces to the housing ecosystem that we can't have everybody in that room right now. Our goal is that they will find a place to plug in as we continue to grow. But currently, we've tried to account for that by having folks that make up some of the development community right now, primarily nonprofit developers, those who are doing housing work inside of their communities, whether they're elected officials or housing staff, trying to get a good mix of folks across the region in terms of geography, as well as if they're a smaller community or a larger community, and then trying to tap into some of the work that's already being done and lifting up those voices, having those folks who have already started doing some of this organizing in their community. So like Johnson County UCS sits on this. And then we also have Rachel Russell with Wyandotte County CHIPS Safe and Affordable Housing group. So we're trying to tie in those folks that are already sort of doing this work too, so they can bring it back to those conversations they're having in the community. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, I mean, I think we have a really good mix of people at different sectors and at different levels and in different areas of the work. People who are working directly on the ground with people and are hearing those stories that are bringing them to the table, as well as people who are working more at a policy level who are looking at that policy change. So I'm really proud of our committee and who they are and where they represent, and excited to see. They've been, I kind of feel bad because this year has been more of them taking in information and connecting each other on the work that's being done. And so after each meeting, we kind of take a deep breath and we're like, okay, that was a lot of information that we just took in. Just reminding everybody that that's going to help frame the work that we do later. And so right now it has been just learning about the tools, learning about what's out there, who's doing what, what are the demographics within the community as far as housing and the needs. And we have a developer needs assessment that'll be coming out soon that'll kind of give us an idea of where are those gaps that developers are feeling, both for profit and nonprofit, in the creation of housing. And plans across the region that have been brought together. That was a ton of information that we gave to the strategy committee. So just kind of providing that baseline and that background so that as we move forward, thoughtful and intentional decision can be made on what next steps would be.
I was going to say, what are next steps? Like, okay, so we have our strategy committee, we have our co-chairs. What are the next steps after that?
I think I think what Andrea said is really important in terms of what I'd mentioned earlier, laying the foundation, gathering the information, what tools are available, and like the Community Land Trust. We've done a lot of learning around that option. The developer assessment. I'm really anxious to get that information, and so I think that's been a big part of it. But the other thing is, for me, it gives me more confidence in going back to my own county and saying, hey, let's try this or let's look at that, because here's what's going on throughout the region. And as I look forward, I think having this group that can share experiences and have kind of a toolbox of different options, because again, not every community has the same needs. You can't say, well, it worked here, so it'll work there. And that's where I see us going, is continuing to build that toolbox that we can all look at and find out. I can call Rayana and say, how's this working for you, or how did that work? Like we're right now, Johnson County, we're looking at housing trust fund, but you all are way ahead of us. So I can call you and say, what would you do differently, and what would you what's your experience as we're putting this together?
For sure. I would actually just really echo what Commissioner Hanslick said as well, in that I think, to me, what we are able to do through this partnership really is to lay the foundation and establish, we're doing an assessment of what the tools are available, what are the needs, so that we can then ensure that we can fill the gaps where they are, fill those gaps, and then, make other tools available to the developers, to the different communities, so that they can then come and draw from those. I think really what I see is that in the past, there have been all these different conversations, maybe meetings, discussions, working in silos. But as I stated earlier, I think we are better, stronger together. And so I think the real benefit of our partnership here, of this group, really is going to be that different communities, different entities across the region will be able to grow, learn and grow from what we're putting together. So I'm excited about us, moving forward. You mentioned the community land trust, and that's something that we're trying to do in Kansas City as well, to establish a community land trust model so we can create perpetually affordable housing. But I think, the part that is somewhat frustrating to me is, I think, as Andrea, as you said, many people in the community recognize, they're starting to feel the effects of the housing crisis that we have, but they don't quite understand it. And so, when we talk about, in Kansas City, we talk about creating affordable housing, maybe we're zoning, property or zoning an area to create some units, some affordable units, and they immediately think affordability means, affordable housing means the very, very low or homeless.
A tenement.
And, and they don't understand that, in Kansas City, we have city employees that work a full-time job. We have many healthcare workers. I work in healthcare workers that are serving our vulnerable seniors that work full-time jobs, sometimes 2 jobs, and they can't afford housing. And so so I think they're confused about what affordable housing is. And so I would love for us to get to an excellent definition of what that means, so that people can understand, as we policymakers and developers are trying to create that housing, so they can understand that, it is those teachers, those firefighters and police officers, people that, tend to have the respect of the community, that also can't afford these units or these, afford housing. And so I think I would love to see us accomplish that next.
And I appreciate your saying that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about, that's something, the idea of equity and diversity being woven into these plans and conversations, because I think, especially in Johnson County, with the county's history of redlining, and that still impacts till today, and that's something we have to look at. I mean, we're seeing what's happening in Prairie Village.
You said it. I was making it.
Well, we see what's happening. These issues are real, and it takes a lot of education. I think that's something that this partnership helps with too, is raising awareness of these equity and diversity issues, but also we are able to work together to seek resources and use our congregate resources to bring that awareness too, that this isn't this how does this issue of housing impact you? You might say, I have a house, doesn't impact me. Well, yes, it does if your child's teacher can't afford to live in the community, or the person that the barista that makes your coffee can't afford, or they have to spend an hour and a half on the bus to get to their workplace.
Yeah.
You know, how it's frustrating when people only think about themselves and from a housing standpoint. And we have to work to raise that awareness.
And finding those points that we can all agree on. And I think, most people understand that we want to live in healthy communities where people are healthy, and we want to live in communities where everyone from, I often call it generational housing, because it's everyone from where my 18-year-old who moves out to my 100-year-old, grandparent or parent can live in a neighborhood together. And most people would agree that that's what they want. They want to have a place that they can retire to, where they can stay by their church and stay by their school or their grandkids' schools, or stay where their grocery store is and their friends are. But at the same time, when my kids are ready to move out, that there's a place for them in the community that they grew up in, that they can afford. And I think that that's the place that a lot of people can understand and connect to, no matter where you are, no matter what community you're in, is that everyone wants those things, and everyone wants those things for their community. And so finding those opportunities to weave that into this work. And you had asked about next steps. So as we move forward, this strategy committee will be taking the information that they gathered and using those tools to identify some intentional regional goals.
Yeah.
So what is it that we can do across the region together? We know that there are unique things to communities, but what is it that we can be doing at a regional level to create an impact in all of these communities around housing and providing affordability for people in our community? But then also creating a structure around that, so that we know that once we have those goals, the four of us are not going to solve the regional housing issues that we have, and understanding that there are organizations doing this work. There are people bringing others together around this. There are communities working on this. And how do we lift them up and plug them into this work so that we can move towards those larger regional goals? I think that's what's unique, too, about our area is, we've been talking about to a lot of organizations across the country, and a lot of them will do like maybe two cities are working together, or it'll be like a county that's bringing together a few cities. So a lot of the coalitions we're looking at are kind of smaller and working on these same issues. I think it's going to be, it's kind of a big lift for us to do, but it's also wonderful and beautiful to see this willingness and this interest in bringing us together. And I think that it's going to be a pretty bright light in our country as a model as to how people can work together and make those changes at a larger level within the region to be an example as to how that can work. And I think we're going to see that here moving forward.
All right. Okay. Closing comments, thoughts, takeaways, big pictures, anything you want, just the common person to know who's not in on all things Regional Housing Partnership, or even housing in general. Or what I like that I've heard central from everyone is debunking the myths of housing and what affordable housing is. So let's take it away. Closing comments, thoughts.
I would say something that we've been able to accomplish pretty early on is getting some of that baseline information in kind of a digestible way through data stories and data storytelling and blogs. So if somebody's trying to kind of dive in and find out more about what's going on, LISC just put out a blog about actually our data work.
Yes.
But we have information on Mark's website right now. We're eventually going to have a landing page for all things RHP, but you go to the news section, you can search for housing, and there's lots of good data stories to just start getting your head wrapped around what the region's facing. So,
yeah. So I guess a little bit to your point, but like what I would like people to take away is that, as been mentioned before, this is a very large, sometimes on the ground when we're working on things, we call it a wicked issue. It's very complicated. There's many moving parts. There's a lot of knots. And it's not easy. And we didn't get here in 2 years. And so it's not going to be solved in 2 years. And so it's really important, as Katie and I have talked, that we need to create space so that we can learn. I don't like to use the word failure, but we need to create space to understand that a lot of what we're doing is challenging the status quo. And so there needs to be space to move in that. And I wish that people would understand that piece of it, is that we need to have space to be creative and do different things and learn from them. And that also this is going to take some time to figure out how we all work together and what that breaking down those silos looks like, and how we create that trust and provide a space for people to be vulnerable, but also to learn. And so that's one thing I hope people would take away and really think about as we move forward in this work.
Dope.
Well, I agree with what Andrea said, that not only are we trying to find practical solutions, we're also trying to raise awareness of the reality. And to Katie's point, data is so important. And that's something that this partnership, and especially the partnership with Mark and LISC, is able to provide. Because, just like the gentleman I mentioned, I can use data and say, well, actually, this is the average salary, and then here's the average cost of a home, and that's not matching up. And so I think the opportunities, we have to look at all of those opportunities, not just the nuts and bolts, but also housing. There's a lot of feeling around housing. We all need housing, and we all have different ideas of what is the ideal. And so we have to respect that there are a lot of feelings around that, besides just the kind of the nuts and bolts of looking at how do we create opportunities for more and different kinds of housing. And some of the things we've talked about is, home ownership's always been the traditional American way of generating wealth. Well, is that going to be this case in the future? Is that the case now?
That's it.
And so how do we look at housing maybe in different ways? Is a single family home the ideal? There's a lot of different feelings around that. So I think part of our work here is looking not only at the options, but also how do we change the conversation in the community.
Well, I would just say, I think the way I look at it is, every entity, every person plays a different role in this. And I think that what I would say to people is to get involved, to educate yourself, ask your questions, no matter what role you play. I think as we are trying to create something new, we're trying to do something that hasn't been done in this region or anywhere at this size, as Andrea indicated. I think, you mentioned, being patient with us, but also as we are seeking survey questionnaire, as we're seeking information and feedback, providing that, whether it's, because there's, the housing industry has many different components or sectors, from the developer to the banks to the realtors to property owners to tenants. There's all these different components in this. And so as we are trying to put together the toolbox and bring the key entities together to come up with a strategy, that feedback is imperative that we have. And so just want to encourage people to make sure that they educate themselves and that they provide the information. And if we're asking for help, if we are asking for you to join us in this, to please do that, because I again believe that we're better, stronger together. And it's because every community is different, every need is going to be different, every community is at a different place on the continuum, then being able to provide, to have the information to provide as much for as much available to each one of those, no matter where they are, no matter where that entity or group is. If we can create something for the greater good, I think we'll all be better off for that. Absolutely. And the only way we get to that is us working collaboratively together. So finally, I do want to just thank you all. I know I've thanked you all personally, but just want to thank you all for inviting me to be able to co-chair this with Commissioner Hanslick. It's been a learning opportunity for me, and it's been an honor to be able to serve in this capacity.
Well, I say this, systems change is hard work. Systems change is not for the faint of heart. And thank you, ladies, for taking up this mantle. Thank you for what it is going to do for future generations. Thank you for just disbanding all the myths and the ideas that people have and just bringing them back down to reality. Because housing is something that affects all of us. And, we cannot discuss housing without discussing financial stability or even economic development, how it's all hand in hand, and how you can get to a place where you have housing. But then if you can't maintain that housing, then you have an issue. So all of these things are work that LISC lifts up on a day-to-day basis. And so we just thank you for being wonderful partners and co-workers and keep pushing the envelope. All right, y'all. That was this month's Community Wise podcast. We'll check you next month.